opening title sequence for Marvel and Netflix's The Defenders is pretty neat, and if you'd like a tutorial on how to create the silhouetted look used throughout most of the titles, then you should go over to the official Hitfilm channel where I did a guest tutorial for them on how to do that look. This tutorial only covers how to make the Defenders logo itself. I'm Mike Miller from Triam Visual. Let's make a Defenders logo. Here we are in Hitfilm Express 2017. Let's go ahead and create a new project. We'll set the resolution to 1080p at 24 frames per second and hit Start Compositing. We'll go ahead and come down to the Settings cog in the lower left-hand corner and change this composite shot to be 5 seconds long. We'll need to bring in a photo of a stone texture, and we'll go ahead and drag that into this composite shot. I'll scale the texture down to fit the horizontal width of the screen, then create another composite shot. We'll name this composite shot Depth Matte. Leave it at 1920 by 1080, 24 frames per second, and 5 seconds long. In this new composite shot, create a new text layer. We'll make this 1900 pixels wide and 1060 pixels tall. Select the text tool. I'm going to use a font called Billboard. Once I've typed in my text, I'll highlight it, click the center paragraph button, and then scale it up until it fills the entire width of this composite shot. Create another text layer. This one can be a lot smaller, say 400 by 150. I'll keep the same font and type in the word "the." You can't see what I just typed because the font size is still set to 448, too large to see in the text box. By hitting Ctrl-A on the keyboard, I can automatically select my text and then just scale it down until it appears. We'll go ahead and rename our text layers at this point. Right-click the layer and change its blend mode to Difference. Drag it up to the top of the P. This text is larger than I need it to be, so we'll move into the text controls, open up the transform properties, and scale it down to fit. Parent the layer to the presenters layer. Grab the presenters layer and center it vertically in the frame. We'll create a new plane layer and leave it at 50% gray. Drag that underneath both of our text layers and select the freehand mask tool. We'll just create a kind of a jagged shape around our text. Move up to the presenter's text layer and duplicate that. Select the bottom copy, reselect the text tool, and hit Ctrl-A to reselect the text. We'll go into the text controls and change the outline color to black. Move up to this control and change the outline width to something like 15. Our jagged gray plane is cutting into the black outline of the text. We'll just go ahead and open up the transform properties for that and scale it up a couple percentage points. And maybe I'll go back in and adjust a couple of these mask points a little bit. While I'm here, I'll go into the mask properties, twirl open the shape controls, and turn the roundness up to maybe 3 pixels. I'm going to return to that first composite shot layer that I made, go back to the settings icon, and rename this Stone Texture, which I should have done to begin with. Alright, let's create another composite shot, and call this Logo Animation. Leave it at 1920 by 1080 pixels, 24 frames per second, and leave its duration at 5 seconds. Drag the stone texture composite shot into the logo animation composite, and then drag the depth matte below the stone texture layer. Select both layers and change their compositing mode to 3D plane. Then parent the depth matte layer to the stone texture layer, then click the eye icon to hide the depth matte layer. We don't need to see that. Move up to the effects list and type in Set. Grab the Set Matte effect and drag that to the stone texture layer. Twirl open the controls for the Set Matte, select the source layer parameter, and choose the depth matte layer. Go ahead and leave the matte source as alpha and the blend mode as replace. Come back over to the effects list and type in Pair. Grab the parallax effect and drag that to the stone texture layer just below the Set Matte effect. Twirl open the parallax controls, and under Height Map, select the Depth Matte layer, and check the Invert Map button. This really is most of it. The only problem is, it's a little bit hard to see, because there's no light picking out the depth. Let's go ahead and create a new light layer, and we'll rename this Red Light. Once we've added the light, we can see what's happening. The depth map and the parallax are combining with the stone texture layer to create the depth in our letters. Let's make a couple more changes to the stone texture layer. Right now, this layer is being double lit. There are illumination parameters in the parallax filter responding to the scene light, but there are also material parameters for the layer itself. The layer is being lit by the parallax filter, then being lit again by the material properties. This means the layer itself is being lit twice, yielding very strong highlights that we don't necessarily want. We'll turn off illuminated and receive shadows in the material properties for the layer and keep the illumination in the parallax filter. We'll twirl open the material settings in the parallax filter and make a few adjustments. We'll turn down the diffuse lighting, turn up the specular lighting, and turn down the shininess until we get more of an even illumination. Then I'll adjust the depth slider a bit until I get the look I'm after. 75 looks good. By parenting the depth matte layer to the stone texture layer, I can now move the stone texture layer around and have the depth matte travel with it. I'm going to unparent the depth matte from the stone texture for a moment, just to show you what happens if I move the stone texture layer around without the matte parented to it. Then I'll undo those movements and reparent the layers. Let's go ahead and make one more new composite shot, which we're going to call Tutorial. We'll go ahead and leave this at 1920 by 1080, 24 frames per second, and 5 seconds long. I'll go ahead and drag in the gray plane that's already in the media bin to this layer. Then move up to the Effects tab and look for Tint. I'll drag Tint to this plane, twirl it open, and change the black and white colors to a red, and turn the tint amount up to 100%. I'll create another new text layer and make this one 1900 by 1060 again. In this text layer, I'm going to go ahead and keep the billboard font and the 448 point size and type in Tutorial. I don't want this black outline, so I'm going to highlight all of the text, move back over to this button that says Make Stroke Transparent. Click that, and the outline goes away. I'll center the alignment, grab my selection tool, and center that in the frame. I think I'm going to open up the transform controls for this layer, unlink the scale parameters, and raise the vertical scale to make this taller, then recenter it within the frame. I'll return to my logo animation comp and drag in the tutorial comp. I'll make this a 3D plane as well and parent it to the stone texture layer. Then twirl open its transform controls and just scale it down. I think that's a little too vertically stretched, so I'll go ahead and unlink the scale parameters and maybe scale the Y down a little bit farther. Since the rest of it's at 14, maybe I'll make this 10. That looks about right. I'll go ahead and reposition that a little bit on the Z axis so that it's just a little bit in front of our presenter layer. I'll just drag that back to show. See, there it's behind. Now it's in front. Drag that up. We're ready to animate. Let's move the playhead to about 3 seconds select the stone texture layer, come down to the transform properties, and enable keyframing for position. We'll move back to the very first frame, and we'll just move our stone texture layer forward. I'll hold down the Control key on my keyboard and double-click the position property in the transform controls. This will automatically twirl open the keyframes on the timeline. Now I can drag to select them and change these keyframes from linear to smooth. I'll move back forward to 3 seconds when my text is completely in, and we'll adjust the lighting. I'll zoom out using the middle mouse button on the viewer so I can see where my lights are. I'll open up the controls for the red light layer and change its color to be, well, red. I'll duplicate this red light and rename the duplicate green light, move into its controls and change its color to green. I'll duplicate this one more time, rename the duplicate blue light, come into its properties, and change its color to blue. Now I can space my red, green, and blue lights out somewhere else in 3D space. That's probably good for now. While I'm thinking about it, I'm going to select the tutorial layer, twirl open its material properties, and turn off illuminated and cast shadows. Now we need to animate these lights. Come up to the search tab at the top of the timeline panel and type in INTEN. This filters the timeline to show nothing but the intensity properties of our red, green, and blue lights. We'll activate keyframing for all 3 of them and set the intensities to 0. Now I'm just going to step forward through the timeline, animating each of the red, green, and blue lights to flicker randomly, changing their intensities from 0 to maybe about 70, maybe back down to 0 to 50 or so. I'm just going to keyframe a bunch of random values for each light for about the first 4 seconds of the animation. By selecting the keyframes, holding down the Alt key, and dragging them out, they'll stretch out in time. I'll select all of these keyframes and change their blend mode to smooth. I'll grab the last couple of keyframes on each layer and then paste them in one more time, just to add a little bit more flicker to that last second. That's looking pretty good. Let's clear the search bar. In the actual Defenders logo, the Marvel logo flickers into existence after the Defenders logo has flown in. So to do that, we'll just go ahead, move the playhead to about 3 seconds in, twirl open the tutorial layer, open up its transform controls, and activate keyframing for opacity. We'll set this to 0. Move forward a couple frames, maybe add in a, 50. Couple more frames, back to 0, couple more frames, 25, one more frame, 0. And just animate the opacity to flicker in a little bit. The Defenders logo also has some floating particles. This would be easier to do in Hitfilm Pro with the actual particle simulator, but we can kind of fake that in Hitfilm Express. Let's drag in another copy of the new plane. Come up to the Effects tab and type in Fractal Noise. We'll twirl open the fractal noise and select the Starfield preset. For people using versions of Hitfilm earlier than 2017, You will not have this menu with these presets to apply the star field preset, so I recommend you take a look at Effects Lab 3 on this channel, which covers 7 different ways of making star fields. We'll change this layers blend mode to add. We'll open up the appearance, and we'll change the white color to, I don't know, green. I'll make this a 3D layer, and rename it to Particles 1. I'll make a few more duplicates of this, and rename each of these to Particle 2, 3, and 4. I'll search in the timeline and type in seed. This brings up the seed values for all the 4 particle layers, so I can just change them to something different. Clear that search bar function, and now I'm just going to move each of these in 3D space. I'll go ahead and grab particles 2, 3, and 4, and parent them all to particles 1. Go back into the particle 1 controls, and activate keyframing for position. I'll move this forward a bit, say from -1200 to -900. Move to the last frame of the animation, and change that from -900 to maybe -1300. Just want to adjust the spacing on these layers a little bit. I'm going to turn off the illuminated property on particle layers 2 and 4. This will just give a little bit more variation to the scene. Particle layers 1 and 3 will be responding to the scene lightings, while layers 2 and 4 will just always remain visible. And that covers how to make the logo in Hitfilm Express. I've moved the project file over into Hitfilm Pro for one more step. I'm going to add anamorphic light flares to this scene. Users of Hitfilm Express can buy the anamorphic light flares as part of the atmospheric lighting add-on. I'll just create a new grade layer, name this flare, search for the anamorphic lens flare, and drag that onto the layer. I'll move the playhead, looking for a frame that's at full illumination. Then open up the lens flare controls. I'm going to change the number of streaks from 1 to 2, and then open up the streak 2 parameters. I'm going to change the orientation from horizontal to vertical, and I think I'll check horizontal pivot for both streaks. I'll move to the first frame of the animation and activate keyframing for the length and intensity properties of both streak 1 and streak 2. Then, I'm just going to step through the timeline again, assigning random values as I go. I want to open up the keyframes for both the streak 1 and the streak 2. Go ahead and highlight all of the keyframes for both layers, change them to smooth, and then again, hold down the Alt key and drag these out again to fill the entire length of the timeline. I'll just go ahead and grab some of these keyframes and spread them out a little bit to randomize the animation a little bit more. I'm making one more change. I've decided I don't want the logo to come to a complete stop at 3 seconds. I wanted to keep moving throughout the entire animation. But I still wanted to hit the point it's hitting at 3 seconds. I've gone to the end of the animation, created one more keyframe, and I'm going to select the first and last keyframes and change their interpolation mode to manual Bezier. Then I'll click the keyframe at 3 seconds and delete it. And adjust the manual Bezier curves so that the logo hits the same point at 3 seconds that it did with the initial animation. And when we play this back, That looks pretty good. I think the flares are a little too much. Let's go ahead and... just change the opacity of the anamorphic flares layer to 50%, and there it is. That's done. And that's how to make a Defender-style logo in Hitfilm. Remember to go over to the Hitfilm official YouTube channel and check out the tutorial on how to create the rest of the Defender opening title sequence. I'd like to thank you for sitting through this tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it and have learned some useful techniques that will help you create your own title sequences in Hitfilm. I'm Mike Miller for Tri-M Visual, and I'll see you next time.